Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Marginalized Notes. Today, we are going to talk to Paul Williams. Many of you know him by being the host of the infamous podcast, Blogging Theology. And today, we are going to talk about theology studies, comparative religion studies, and debate culture around theology and about comparative religion. We're also going to talk about the relevance and significance of discussing theology and theological topics and other Islamic topics within the context of what's been happening around us in the Muslim world and the broader global South. Paul, how are you? It's lovely to have you here.
Alhamdulillah. Lovely to be here. Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you so much. Well, let me start with a very obvious and very personal question. I know you talked about this before, but also to introduce this to our audience, to Marginalized Notes audience, we would like to know about the story of blogging theology, especially that I consider it to be one of those experiences or projects that connect discussions within academia and within the ivory tower and within, the kind of guests you interviewed and you talked about, and connecting this to the general public. And although I don't really like this, division and this identification of the general public, but yeah, you get what I mean. And so yeah, in that context, how would you like to tell us the story of blogging theology?
Well, the way you're framing the question implies there was a conscious narrative to tell from the beginning of the establishment of blogging theology and up to today, and that's not really what happened. So going back in time to about three and a half years ago, I think, during the COVID lockdown here in the UK, I was in London, and it was a very extraordinary time. I remember walking around the streets of the West End, Piccadilly Circus, in fact, and on a Saturday afternoon, and it was like an apocalyptic scene from a movie after the Holocaust, not after the nuclear Holocaust. There was no one around. It was empty in one of the busiest places in the capital, and that's because everyone was at home. We weren't all dead. We were basically told to stay indoors at that time. Well, you were allowed out. It wasn't an offense to go out, but people chose not to. But I did, just to have a look, because I knew this was an historic moment. And I took some photographs of the place, very odd during the day on a Saturday afternoon with no human beings around, really. And that was the backdrop, really, of the beginning for me on blogging theology, because I decided I got some money and I bought a new MacBook Pro, which I didn't really need, but hey, so I had far more capacity and far more capability than I needed at that time. But I'm glad I did, because it stood me in good stead since. So I communicate online with the outside world to mitigate that isolation a bit by making a video. So I just started making videos of subjects that I found interesting. I wasn't making videos for other people, really. I mean, in terms of, I must create a channel and do something amazing. No, I just did some videos. I think it was about the New Testament, the Gospels, Christianity, the kind of thing that I was obsessed about, really, in terms of academic study and trying to communicate what's really going on in the academy about these topics. And I remember after a week or something, I got 1,000 subscribers. Wow. And I was, wow, this is amazing. And the thing was, it took off, and it didn't just take off like a couple of subscribers a day.
People were interested.
Yeah, I was getting thousands of subscribers every day, and over the weeks and months, it just, became extraordinary. And I remember a friend of mine, because I told him about this, he said, "Have you thought of monetizing it, Paul?" And I thought, what is this word monetizing? So I actually Googled it, because it sounded vaguely American. Oh, you mean that? Oh, no, I hadn't thought about that. So I had no interest at that point in making money. It was just making content for the sake of it. And then someone gave me some wonderful advice. I got this advice from so many people who knew what they were talking about, who knew about social media and YouTube, and they all told me the same thing. Paul, don't make long videos. No one watches long videos. People have a small attention span. Make it 10 minutes long, 15 minutes. And I ignored all this advice because I thought, I'm not making it for
the clicks.
I'm not making it for the click. I'm making it because it's what I want to do, because I'm just doing it for my own reason. So I ignored them, and thank goodness I did. Give one example. A couple of years ago, I did a video of Professor Al-Tubki from Brandeis University, one of the Ivy League universities in America. He's an amazing guy. He taught Arabic at Harvard University. He's a convert to Islam. And he did a video with me. It was 4 hours long. So it breaks all the rules. It's a terrible idea, apparently, but it's had over 250,000 views. And it's a brilliant video understanding the whole LGBTQ issue from an Islamic point of view. So he brings in great research about Islam and about the Western ideologies behind LGBT, secular liberalism, and a fantastic video. And it shouldn't be successful, and it was. So I learned then sometimes to ignore good advice.
Yeah,
I don't always ignore good advice, but on this occasion I did, and I'm so pleased I didn't pay attention to it.
Oh yes, that's wonderful. Yes, and absolutely, we always think about this when we are thinking about what kind of videos to post. When that the videos we post from productions, for example, on YouTube. No, the reel on Instagram has to be 1 minute, 1 minute 20 seconds, etc. But then you see other videos, for example, that are 8 minutes on Instagram, which is a long time to post on Instagram. But then people are watching and people are interacting.
And the thing is why they're watching it, and of course this was what people weren't really understanding, is that people crave good content. They crave knowledge. They don't want clickbait. They don't want clickbait. They don't want TikTok necessarily all the time. They want to be given substantial expert advice and information about subjects which are very common. They want guidance, and they are prepared to watch it. And it also is not true about the 10-minute thing, where people watch Marvel movies, Spider-Man, and these go on for hours and hours and hours. People do watch very long content. Anyway, let alone more serious academic content. And also what I was doing, it turns out, and again, it wasn't, the whole thing about blogging theology wasn't planned. It was organic. It grew organically, naturally.
People do sense that. People
and so I look back at my early videos now and I cringe because the production values were dreadful. The audio was awful. The visuals were awful. I didn't know how to do anything. And credit goes to a professor in Alexandria in Egypt, who's actually
that's where I'm from.
Wow. Yeah. Well, he actually runs the main hospital in Alexandria, and he's a surgeon. And he reached out to me. He speaks English perfectly, of course, and said, "Look, Paul, have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about doing that?" And I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, "Well, what do you mean? I don't understand what you mean." So he was very patient with me because I was very ignorant, and he took me through a process of gradually improving the audio quality, improving the visual quality, improving this, that, and the other. And thank goodness he did, because I look back at those videos are still there on BT, and they are awful. But still, some of those videos now are still being watched today, 3 years later, because if you can ignore all the bad, appalling audio visuals, the content is valuable.
Good content lasts,
and that's it. The rest of it you just have to try and ignore.
Yes, absolutely. Speaking of good content, I want to focus on the theme of blogging theology. Why do you think now, 3 years and a half, I think, why do you think people were craving good content about theology?
Well, I must admit the term blogging theology, I interpret the word theology very broadly. So it's not just talk about God in the formal academic sense of theology. Theology, in my view, covers pretty much everything in life, because God is sovereign over everything, and ultimately everything refers to him. So I could talk about literally anything, like history or philosophy or politics or the news, and I frequently do, but it all relates ultimately to God, because he creates and sustains the universe, and we are his. So in a fundamental way, it's impossible not to talk theologically about it, in a sense, in the ultimate sense, about anything really. So there's a narrow and a broader understanding. It's the broader understanding that I have. So my content is very eclectic. So, for example, when my local church here was burned down a year and a half ago, as a Church of England place, and Muslims were blamed for this completely wrongly. I did a video about that because this theology is to do with churches, and attacks on Muslims. So. I don't confine it to the narrowest sense of what theology is at all. In principle, I can talk about anything. I mean, the only thing I don't talk about is sport and cooking, basically, because I know nothing about sport and I don't really do much about cooking.
Well, and also talking about theology in that sense is a bit tricky, because even within, and I'm sure you're familiar, even within the discussions within historical discussions, I don't like using that word arbitrarily, but scholastic discussions about theology, etc.
Yep.
There has been a division between this is, something you talk about to the general public, but these kind of discussions are advanced discussions where the public should not be engaged without being equipped, etc. But you come here to bridge this gap in a way and just to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think it has to do also with the modern format of things and social media and everything, and these things are changing forcibly. But how do you manage that? How do you perceive this first?
Yeah, I mean, like you, I don't like the term the general public. It's a bit patronizing, condescending. I think the educated general public, if you like, most people who are thoughtful people, that's my audience really, and it's right, I think, that we should listen to what scholars and academics are saying about faith, about theology, about Islam, Judaism, Christianity. And often they're not able to, for various reasons, to project their knowledge, their expertise onto a wider canvas, into the general public.
Why do you think that is? Now that you have,
there are several reasons. I mean, those of us who've been to university know. I mean, when I was at uni, there are some lecturers are fantastic. They'll turn up without notes, and it's just an absolute pleasure to hear them lecture. I think one, A.C. Grayling, Professor A.C. Grayling, who's a philosopher. When I did philosophy at university, he had a big mane of hair, and he was witty, urbane. He was just so entertaining, and he knew his brief extremely well. He was an expert on Kant and all sorts of stuff. And so I just sit back there and just enjoy the experience of being lectured to by Professor A.C. Gray, who was my personal tutor as well. And he was he's an atheist as well. So I was a Christian at the time. Anyway, that's another subject. But other academics who I won't mention were dry as dust. I remember one who taught me Aristotle. And I used to love Aristotle. I'd read Aristotle before I went to university. And the way he taught it, I had to fight off the urge to say, I never want to read Aristotle again, because the way it was so uninteresting, what he said. And I knew Aristotle was interesting, but he was killing that interest in me. So I think some scholars are good at being scholars. They're not good at being communicators, and that's a problem. So, yeah.
There's one question on a different front, but also very related. Recently, and I mean, even that narrative has been going on even after, especially after the Arab Spring, after the years 2011 onwards. There has been more attention to what's written in the Western academia or what's written in English about the Arab world and about Islam, etc. And I would like your take on that also. If you are addressing the Arab audience, and this episode is going to be translated to Arabic, do you think it's important to read what's written about Islam in English? And is it the same old Orientalist takes, or things are now taking new shape? The discussion itself.
Huge subject. There's so many things one could say. I think, yes, I think the Arab world should take and do take the West very seriously. Obviously, we have no choice. The West is hegemonic in the world, both economically, politically, culturally. But I think I part of what I do, and I'm passionate about, is helping people to try and understand the Western tradition, by which I mean the West in its history, going back 2,000 years, 2,500 years, going back to the ancient Greeks, to people like Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and forward, the New Testament itself, written in the first, second centuries, Christianity, of course, the rise of the early church, Augustine, the medieval period, people like Thomas Aquinas, and others, the Renaissance in Europe, and then the Reformation begun by Martin Luther in 1517, and John Calvin, and moving through to the Enlightenment period in the West, and colonialism, when the French and the British and the Portuguese and others conquered, occupied the world in various ways, and through to the 19th century, the rise of Marxism, industrialization, 20th century, up to today. The reason I kind of mention all that is that it's really beneficial to try and understand as objectively as possible what makes the West tick. Okay, because the ideas that today are in the atmosphere that seem just natural, just seem universal, are actually the outcome, the product of a particular geographical area, Europe, and later on America, as the outpouring of that, which have particular historical characteristics to do with the history of Europe, to do with our own internal problems, to do with religious wars between Catholics and Protestants, for example, the rise of secularism, which was a solution to this terrible butchery that took place amongst Christians. Is really great if we to understand today and why Muslims are on the back foot so often when it comes to the Western secular liberal worldview. We've got to understand it historically. The genealogy of the ideas goes back quite a way, back to the ancient Greeks, as I mentioned, to Plato and Aristotle, who is still really, really important today. They're still studied by Ivy League students in the United States who read Plato's Republic, for example. They read Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. And these people will presumably go on to have positions of power in America. They are influenced by these writers and many others. Machiavelli's The Prince, for example, this Renaissance book about how to attain power and keep it. Very immoral, deliberately so. We benefit, I think, from understanding these writers and their seminal influence, their enduring influence on us today. Another name, John Locke. John Locke, I don't know if you've heard of him or not, a 17th century English philosopher, political philosopher. He is seen as the father of liberalism. Liberalism is the reigning ideology in Britain and the West generally. And John Locke's thought was quoted, his work was quoted by the founding fathers of America in their Declaration of Independence. They copied and pasted chunks of Locke's work from these second treaties of government. And so read Locke. Read his letter on tolerance, because his thought is still influential today. This is the genealogy of ideas, the DNA of the West. And if you really want to understand what's going on, dig deeper than the surface to grapple with the unique configuration of ideas that has produced secular liberalism today. And the claim that it's universal. It's not universal. That's the claim. It's a particular European, as I say, ideology, which has deep roots in the past. We must understand that as Muslims so that we can critique it from our own epistemology. The Islamic tradition has its own epistemology. We have our own sources and tradition. We have great, great thinkers, Al-Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah, etc., of course. So we must draw on that and renew the faith in the light of these challenges and develop our own critical approach to the Western hegemonic ideology by understanding it deeply without either just dismissing it as kufr. And it is kufr, absolutely it's kufr, but understand it, because then we can intelligently engage it. And the other error, apart from just dismissing it, is just to accept it. Say, oh, well, it's the modern world, it's today's world, it's the era of TikTok and Hollywood, we'll just accept. No, don't do that either. Understand it deeply, intelligently, so we can push back and critically engage it and stand strong on our own Islamic epistemologies and present an alternative to secular modernity, an alternative which is based on the Quran and the Sunnah, which is the true source of truth and liberation for mankind now and in the hereafter. And this is my project. This is what I'm fascinated about. But it means reading books. It means thinking deeply. It means knowing what to read. And it means having confidence in our own tradition to push back, but without falling into the trap of either just simply rejecting it because it's haram, or slavishly embracing it, which is just servitude to another alien civilization, but having a third way, which is our way, the Islamic way, and standing on that. And I think the resources are there in abundance in Islamic civilization. We just need to adopt them and progress with them in our own time. And people are doing that. I'm very impressed at Cambridge Muslim College here in England. There's a Tuna College in Berkeley, California. I personally know, have honored to meet a number of excellent young scholars who are completely fluent and knowledgeable of the Islamic tradition, and they're completely fluent and knowledgeable in the Western tradition. And they can intersect between the two and critique it and do some fine work in English. This is a lot of Islamic scholarship is taking place in Dallas, Texas. I can name scholars, Islamic scholars, who are doing original research in Dallas, of all places, in Texas.
Yes, this is actually something. Country. Absolutely, this is actually something I wanted to ask you about. That even well, of course, you have deliberately talked about the importance of reading the Western tradition and the Western intellectual history, the development of the Western mind, etc., the exceptionalism of European experience and our relation with it, of course, as Muslims, as the global South, as the Arab world, etc. All these spaces that became spaces of events. And speaking of that, I also want to talk about the literature that's written on Islam itself in the West, well, the broader sense of the word West. Are you noticing a shift in terms of the amount or the narrative in discussions on theology and on Islamic theology when it comes to Westerners discussing Islamic theology, or Muslims that are, as you mentioned, writing in English? Do things seem like there's something new? Like there's a new phase. We have been through the Orientalist phase. We have been through the antagonistic phase. We have been through, and it's still going on, of course. But how do you see the sphere right now of Islamic theological discussions?
It's complicated. I think there are different contradictory streams going on here, as far as I understand it, in the West. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but it's just what I personally observe. On the one hand, you have non-Muslim Western intellectuals and scholars, excuse me, people like Professor John Hoover from the University of Nottingham in the UK, who's been doing some fantastic work on the thought of Ibn Taymiyyah. His theology, particularly over the years, and in fact, there are some Salafi brothers who seek him out to do their PhDs under John Hoover, who is, I think, a Christian, funnily enough, because of his good scholarship about Ibn Taymiyyah. Wow. So there is progress there, because Hoover is not really an Orientalist. He does, I think, do some good scholarship. And there are other scholars like that, other Western scholars at Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, and so on, who as a general movement away, I think, in the academy from the Orientalist tropes of the past. There's particularly Edward Said's seminal book on Orientalism, of course. Yeah. While Halak, of course, who is officially described as a Palestinian Christian at the University of Columbia, his work on
impossible state, Sharia,
impossible state, on all sorts of things, restating Orientalism, his recent work, and on Islamic law and so on. Extraordinary scholar, Columbia, who is actually the same university that Edward Said was in. And he's actually quite critical of Edward Said for not really following through on some of his principles, but that's a different subject. So there's a lot of good work going on in the West, I think. There's a new sophistication and depth and an awareness of the problem. I think Nikolai Sinai, who's a professor of Islamic studies at Oxford University, is a German scholar,
mm,
is not a Muslim. And his work on the Quran is very, although I don't necessarily agree with all his principles, he practices historical critical method, which is this Western approach, which does have highly problematic assumptions.
mm,
Nevertheless, he is aware of the past mistakes that Orientalist scholars at Oxford have made, and he's very aware not to make them. So he's not kind of seeing the Quran as a copy and paste job, and he's not falling for those traps. He's doing
mm,
something interesting and new, and so he's worth. And I got a friend of mine, Usman Sheikh, is doing his PhD. He's a Muslim, Sunni Muslim, doing his PhD with Nikolai Sinai. So
mm,
that there's positive development. On the other hand, there's also a much more stronger political trend in the West towards increasing Islamophobia, increasing rejection of Muslims in the West. We see this with the rise of Marine Le Pen in France, with the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, with the election of all sorts of people in Poland and Italy. And we are seeing a resurgence of a militant anti-Islamic sentiment, politicized, weaponized
mm.
in Europe, which oddly at the same time is allied to a very pro-Zionist point of view, because the right
Yeah.
historically has been very anti-Semitic, obviously, with in the 1930s. But the modern reincarnation of this kind of worldview, right-wing worldview, is actually philo-Semitic. They at least claim, but disingenuously, I don't know, to be pro-Zionist. Which I think the reason is because they see that the Muslims as the new Jews, the new hate group, that they're going to demonize Muslims.
Mm,
So politically, we're seeing the increased hostility towards Muslims and in institutions of power, unfortunately. But academically, we're seeing a much more sophisticated approach to Islamic theology. So
mhm.
in terms of the West, we're seeing these contradictory and alarming developments. And I think they're only going to get more so. I don't see them as diminishing. They're going to accelerate, which is maybe the ultimate question about being Muslim at all in Europe. If we're seeing in Germany, the position of Muslims in Germany is very difficult in terms of doing anything, saying anything that is not approved of by the state. And the France as well, if you don't subscribe to the militant secularism there, you can be kicked out of the country. And imams have been recently for simply preaching from the Quran. So we're seeing worrying developments in Europe alongside these positive academic developments, I think.
In light of this, how do you see the parallel culture also of discussing theology? Because on one hand, we have all these elements interacting together, and on the other hand, we have also that that traditional debate culture, and it's not traditional in the sense of that it's historic. Of course, we had it in Islamic circles, even historically. But there are some sentiments. For example, I remember while studying usul fiqh, there's a quote from al-Shirazi, and he was saying, "لا تأخذوا العلم عنا في الجدل." Don't take knowledge from us while we are debating, because sometimes we advocate with what's right and with what's wrong. That's in fifth century. I'm talking Hijri century here, and we have seen in modern times the culture of debate when it comes to figures like Ahmad Didat and
Yes.
the contemporary manifestations of this culture. To what extent do you see this as useful? To what extent, what considerations would you have while talking about a debate or yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole question of debates. I mean, I'm a regular at a place called Speaker's Corner in London. This is
Mm,
a kind of a famous place where in a part of Hyde Park in central London,
mm,
which is actually protected by law, where we're allowed to exercise our free speech completely. And this has been
okay.
going on for centuries. It's a very English thing. So you can go along there and you can argue and say what you want, really.
Mm,
Other countries have tried to replicate this, including hilariously China.
mm,
I mean, I laugh because there is no free speech in China on a great deal, a number of things.
mm,
But so there's actually a photograph of Speaker's Corner and it's completely empty. No one goes there because if you were to criticize the Chinese government, of course, you'd be arrested. But anyway, it is very popular here, and the cameras unfortunately have descended on Speaker's Corner for several years now. So people come along and they record stuff and put it on YouTube, and you can watch these debates. Uh, so that's kind of the low end of things, and I'm not being a snob because I also do it. I'm as guilty as the next man.
Is it useful?
Is it useful? Mostly not. Mostly it's to be avoided. Occasionally, you can, if you seek it out, you can have a good discussion, a good debate. But a lot of it, you get very rabid Christian missionaries who are there to attack Muslims. Most Muslims respond appropriately by just ignoring them, but sometimes young hotheads will engage them back, and it's not edifying at all. But there you go, because there are no controls over it. It's just a free for all. So any person who has mental health problems can go there, and a lot of them do, and just it's not edifying at all. So that's kind of the low end of the market. But there are other forums, of course, which are much more beneficial. You get online debates between Muslims and Christians, of course, frequently. We all know who the people are, some well-known people. You mentioned Ahmed Deedat, and I think in his time in the 1980s in South Africa and so on, his approach, he was hugely popular and seen as a hero to many. And I think rightly so, because at that time, when Christian missionaries basically dominated the field, to have someone like him come along, like a knight in armor, like a hero, to fight the dragon. I mean, he did it with great skill and intelligence and wit. Actually, he was very witty, and so he was a hero for that time. I'm not sure really that's going to work so much today, because the Christian missionaries, some of them anyway, have improved their game a lot. And although they distort and twist, at least they do read the Quran, some of them, and read the Hadith, some of them, and read the Sirah, some of them. And so we've got to be more sophisticated in our response to them. But high-end debates, I mean, if I may mention Blogging Theology, Professor Ali Attai, I've not mentioned this publicly before, so this is an exclusive on your channel. In December, he's coming back on Blogging Theology, and he will be having a formal discussion / debate with a prominent British academic Christian theologian about is the Trinity monotheism. In other words, can believers in the Trinity be accurately described as monotheist? And he's obviously going to argue no, I think, and the Christian's going to say yes, it's monotheism. So this is going to be a proper debate or discussion, but with the objective of it being like a resource for Muslims and Christians to understand the issues better. So you quoted someone in the past saying, don't take notes while I'm debating. Well, it's going to be the opposite. Do take notes while this, hopefully, the debate takes place. So you can understand the debate's going to be irenic, it's going to be civilized, it's going to be respectful. I'm going to be moderating it, but it will be an opportunity to learn about the kind of issues that Christians and Muslims disagree about on this central issue of the nature of God. So I'm hoping this will be the other end of the spectrum from Speaker's Corner.
Yes, that's lovely. I mean, even in the Islamic scholarly tradition, debate was a level of education also, because when you ascend in your levels of education until you reach a level where you can debate for or debate on behalf of your doctrine or madhab and it's considered a level of but yes, exactly, if it's within that context of an educational message, then it can be very beneficial. I want to talk about the other a different part of the spectrum also. We talked about debate, but also we have these projects of interfaith and Abrahamic family, and we all belong to the same tree. But after all, there are also political manifestations to this. How can we manage certain truths that can actually be there, yes, we can have a discussion on certain common grounds, common basis, single tree that we should be belonging to, or however you would frame that, but also the political manifestations that come out of these theological nuances. I'm not
Oh
sure if
God.
my question is clear. Okay.
Not terribly clear to me, but I think I get your hint to where you're going. I think it's a huge question. Deserves several hours of response, but yeah, I mean, I'm personally not keen on these kind of interfaith dialogues where we all just say, well, basically we're all on the same side, but all Abrahamic faiths, and let's just get on together. I mean, why I have a problem with that? I mean, the Quran does say, "Come to a common word," but it's on the basis of the truth about the oneness of God. But also, the Quran is very critical of those Christians who have gone to excess in their veneration of Jesus and his mother, peace be upon him, in their desire to, praise him, and they've gone to excess. And obviously, most of them have made him into a god. So, Islam is the final revelation given to mankind. Islam is supersessionalist. So, we believe it's the final answer, the final word from God. And to the extent that other religions before that have gone astray and contradict that, then they are in the wrong, actually. So we're not on the religions are not on the same footing. And there is, as I say, Islam is supersessionalist. It supersedes the previous religions, and they, to the extent that they don't conform to Islam, they are not to be followed anymore, listened to. So, this Abrahamic language I'm not keen on. The language.
Do you see a ground? Okay, an alternative to that. Do you see a ground for having these kind of discussions without it being, at least it's accused of inducing hate, for example?
Oh, I'm sure it'll be accused of inducing. I mean, this whole language of hate has been weaponized now.
Okay.
So if you criticize Benjamin Netanyahu, you're a hater. You're an anti-Semite. Now, I'm not exaggerating. I mean, this is actually what happens.
Of course.
You cannot criticize the government of Israel, even when it's committing blatant war crimes and trying to commit genocide over all the Palestinians, without being called an enemy. That's the standard. So this whole language of hate now, I think, it is used cynically and disingenuously to disarm Palestinian or just basic human criticism of extreme injustice. So we must be very wary of this language when it's used cynically to basically attack Palestinians. It's used cynically to attack anyone who questions the prevailing narrative, which is why I don't like this language. Initially may have had a point to it, but it's become corrupted. The coinage has become completely useless. So Islam is supersession. Christianity is as well. Christianity says Jesus is Lord, and only by believing in Jesus as God are you going to go to heaven. I mean, if you don't believe that, at least in evangelical iterations of that theology, which are very common in the United States, then you're going to hell. So, is that hate speech? Well, it could be from one point of view, but from another point of view, it's Christianity. And Muslims are not saying, by the way, that just because you don't believe in Islam in the narrowest sense of affirming the prophethood of Muhammad, you're never going to hell. I mean, I believe what Al-Ghazali says is true. If you've not heard about Islam, or your impression of Islam is very negative from the media, then God will judge you by what you know, the truth of what you know, not the lies that you've been told. So you may not be able to make an assent to something that has been presented to you in a very negative way. So there's a more nuance, and God is just. He's not going to unjustly condemn people for not knowing the truth because they've never heard it. But so I think, I'm not quite sure about the latter point of your question, but I
think my main point, which you also have covered in a way, but my main point was, can we have these kind of conversations where we claim different truths?
Oh yes,
because
we must. No, I think yes. I think what I'm trying to say is that you can actually get away and say a lot, even in the West, if you do it in the right way. Actually,
how so?
What I mean is, that one can say things if one presents it in a respectful way,
Mm.
in a way that's not that's mindfully not trying to trigger other people. I mean, sometimes it's unavoidable. I mean,
Mm.
but I'm not trying to say you can always do it successfully. But to a lot of the time, if one is respectful in one's demeanor and one's attitude, and will say, well, I'm a Muslim. I believe the Quran is the word of God, and in my tradition, we believe X about, say, LGBT,
Mm.
rather than say, well, LGBT people are terrible people, they're sinners, they're condemned, they're going to hell.
Mm.
Now, that may or may not be true theologically, but
Okay.
in terms of expressing our position, if one does it in a more moderate language, given the context we're in the West, I think people would say, "Oh, well, you're a Muslim then." Well, they
Mm.
understand that. Okay, they're not going to say, "Well, you must abandon your religion." I mean, they shouldn't say that. That's even a worse offense, because then you're not respecting my rights to believe what I want.
Mm.
I think it's how you do it, the manner in which you do it, how you express yourself can actually get you a long way. If you come out with quite aggressive language or quite condemning language, that will
Mm.
trigger people, and you'll get accusations of being an homophobe or transphobe, whatever the word is.
Mm.
So you've got to be careful on how you use language, and then you can say quite a bit, I think.
Mhm. You mention a lot. I noticed that this is at least the fourth time you mentioned the issue of LGBT, and if I can act on my genuine interest in asking you a question that I had in mind and I wanted to ask you about, which has to do also with what we see in the UK, in Canada, and in the US, the changing political spectrum among the youth of what was before the Muslim community there, and we see, and this is something that my generation is always accused of and addressed in those terms, that we are interested in collaborations that have us on the leftist side of things, where there are certain agendas that our parents and seniors and friends are not comfortable with, and basically the word LGBT will be thrown at us in a way that makes us believe that we are in conflict with our own communities. When we are in a demonstration for Palestine on Saturday on the London Bridge, but we have LGBT communities with us, and then our Muslim community in the masjid, they are basically warning us of these kind of coalitions. How do you see that? Do you see that dangerous?
Yes, it is. It is dangerous, and this has actually been discussed at some length in the last year or so.
Hmm.
Various sort of famous people in America, like Dr. Omar Suleiman and others, who have freely stated now that they made mistakes in the past. Now, Omar Suleiman is a very respected leader, a Muslim leader in America, obviously, very well known, highly regarded by many people, and he's done things. So I'm not in any way backbiting. This is all in the public domain. He said this himself, so I'm just describing what he has.
It's also a good chance to say that the people who are listening to us should check the works of the Yaqeen Institute. They have been doing really good works. Yeah.
Yes, and indeed, Yaqeen Institute itself. Sorry, Suleiman founded and is president of the Yaqeen Institute. Yaqeen meaning certainty, of course, in Arabic, which you know better than me. An American-based organization in English, mainly. So, in the past, he and some other members of that institute have been strong allies of the liberal or the left in America.
Okay.
The idea being that, we may not agree with some of these groups, LGBT groups, whatever, or sort of socialist atheist groups, but we're all fighting on, say, this particular issue, Palestine, or immigration issues where immigrants are being attacked, or whatever. We can form common cause. But the problem is, and they have said this now, and I think rightly said this, thank goodness, is that they have paid a price in doing this, because they went quiet on things like LGBT. They didn't give a strong Islamic view or voice, because they didn't want to offend. This idea of, well, if I'm in alliance with these people on a good cause, you end up not saying, or you end up being in events like Suleiman was, which were perceived rather badly by Muslims, when there were kind of priestesses and other kind of strange things going on at that, praying to, you can see it on YouTube.
mm,
So Dr. Suleiman has rightly, acknowledged that he made mistakes, and great for him. And now he's much more critical of these alliances. So the idea now is we shouldn't compromise on Islam. We shouldn't compromise on the truth. And yes, there can be ad hoc alliances, ad hoc events, perhaps,
mm,
but we must be wary of giving the wrong impression, or giving the sense that by our presence at an event we are giving legitimacy to something which is contrary to Islam. And also some statements of other Yaqeen scholars in the past,
mm.
without going into all of that, because one could do, we won't go into it here. Statements were made which are now seen as absolutely not acceptable. So I think Yaqeen have made considerable improvements to
My main
presentation.
question is, do you think it should be prioritized to the extent that it becomes an identity politics like kind of issue, that this is everyone is talking about identity politics, so we are going to engage in identity politics, and this is our identity, and it's by negating this exact issue, and we are going to have it influence our political reconfiguration. But after all, in a place like the UK, for example, the youth and the coalitions that are happening for things like Palestine, etc., the reality on the ground, is it necessary to raise this topic to be a theological matter, a matter that becomes a threat to belonging or not belonging to the Muslim community?
I think it's a consensus now, I think, amongst all these people, that we are Muslims first and foremost. We're not Americans or
Mm-hmm.
Identity politicians. We're Muslim. We're just Muslims first and foremost. That is our identity. People see that as identity politics, whatever. Well, it's not identity politics. It's always been, Muslims have seen themselves as Muslims first and foremost, from the time of the Prophet himself, upon whom be peace. So in other words, we submit to God. We don't submit to the zeitgeist or politics or fashion or the White House or Fox News. We don't submit to any of that. We submit to God. That doesn't mean we are therefore dismissive of our social political responsibilities, but that's our primary, absolute, non-negotiable allegiance, is to God. Now, Christians in the past, by the way, I would understand that attitude very easily, because they have that attitude as well. They don't tend to have that attitude now so much. So in that, we need to exercise hikmah, wisdom, in the alliances we form. And it cannot be misunderstood that in say, going on a march where lots and lots of people go of different backgrounds, if there are LGBT people on that march, it can't be understood that therefore we're endorsing that. We're not. We're on the march because we want to protest about genocide. So, and this is a decision we all must make individually. But in terms of formal alliances where we sit on the same board with people who, that's a different matter. And I think that's needs to be carefully looked at, and not just say automatically we're going to join with these people. There needs to be exercise of wisdom, and also be aware of how it's perceived by people, because it can cause scandal. If we attend events and we're standing next to, a priestess who's praying to the goddess, whatever, and a guy on our left who is a Satanist, and another guy here is a Trinitarian, and we're all holding hands and we're all chanting prayer. I mean, whoa. No, that can't happen. And that did happen once. Not without going into further details. Not me, I mean someone else. So we must be, we must be very wise, but allegiance must be to God. If other people see the identity politics, well, it's not, but that's their issue.
Okay, so I would like to ask you about theology in times like these. We have been watching people that look like us, people that speak our languages, and people that have our religion, people that we relate to on many levels. And watching it is something very new. Watching it in on that level, I am from a generation that had TV and had internet from the very early age. But even for us, it has never been on that level of intensity. And I want to ask whether you found an angle where theology can come and redeem some part of this sadness, or offer some, I don't know, some solace, some answers, some. Do you see engagement with theology to be relevant to these times, to have some sort of impact that you can feel like you can use this platform and do with that while engaging with theology?
Well, it's a complicated question because theology in the Western sense is an academic study of, religion understood in its more kind of philosophical, conceptual sense. And there is, I guess, some value in that. But I know my channel is called Blogging Theology, but it's a bit more than that. I think we can look Islamically at, say, science, or what's the Islamic understanding of evolution or artificial intelligence or Zionism or the Trinity or whatever. It's basically applying the Quran, the Sunnah, and our tradition in fresh contexts like AI, which is unprecedented, arguably. So that is applied theology. So it's not like theology is a separate thing from religion. It's all to do with Tawheed. It's to do with the Quran and the perspectives given in the Quran and the Sunnah, and in our later tradition as well, drawing on great thinkers. I mentioned several of them, Al-Ghazali and Ibn Taymiyyah, etc. So it's applying that rich tradition to these new phenomena in our world. And although LGBT, basically, there are obviously in our tradition teaching about that, but there are certain configurations of it which are distinctive in terms of the Western context, and how, so we need to think that through. How do we respond to these movements amongst us? So there is applied Islamic understanding, which is theological. So it's theocentric. So to put this in a different way, in a Western language, what is a theocentric understanding of X? So the Darwin's theory of evolution, what are we to make of that? How do we understand that from a theological point of view? So the work, for example, of Dr. Shoaib Ahmed, who's now teaching religion and science at the University of Edinburgh as of the beginning of this month. He's got 2 PhDs, one in science, one in theology. He's an outstanding younger scholar who's going to go far, and he's written some marvelous work. I've interviewed him several times. He's a personal friend of mine. In fact, we did a video together that's going up soon on Blogging Theology at the university. This is a great example of someone who's an expert theologian and a scientist who's engaging intelligently with current scientific understandings of the origins of the universe, of the origins of human beings and biological life in general. So that, again, is kind of applied theology. But he's doing it from an informed point of view. He's not just restating the past in the sense of just quoting from a 10th century scholar. He's actually thinking, he's respecting that, but also thinking afresh. I don't mean that he's going beyond what the Quran and Sunnah is saying, but that he is thinking on his own feet again, restating in a new age. And that's very exciting. And the same with artificial intelligence as well. Young theologians are concerned about, young Muslims are concerned about this. How are we to understand this from an Islamic point of view? We need to be thinking about this, producing papers, articles, seminars. We need to be talking about it quite seriously and doing it. Some people are doing it now, but we need to do more of it. Engaging with the issues now from within our tradition. We have the resource to do it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sorry, just one other thing. I'm going to interrupt. UFOs. I know it sounds a bit cranky, but UFOs, aliens, things like, there's actually academic work going on. I've got it behind me on extraterrestrials from an Islamic point of view.
Wow.
Do they exist or not? If they do exist, what is our tradition? Amazing. You go back centuries. Some scholars, very prominent scholars, entertain the possibility of life on other planets. And what does our tradition say about that? What does the Quran say about this? You see, so we need UFOs, or whatever you want to call them, extraterrestrials, whatever. We need to, again, think about that too. Let's get out there and engage. Christians are doing this, by the way. Christians are producing stuff. We need to be doing it as well.
Thank you so much for that. I'm sure that fantasy fans at least will be very happy to explore this this genre. But I wanted to ask you about theology discussions and the relation and impacts with the issues that the Muslim communities are facing, especially when we talk now about what's happening in Palestine. And I think Palestine can be a very good example. Instead of asking an abstract question, we can just ask directly. During the past year, have you found a way to engage theology and the broader Islamic discussions that are happening on your channel with what's happening in Palestine? Can
Well,
people who are
yeah,
interested in learning about this also connect it
yes.
to their daily living experiences?
Well, there's various levels there. I think Dr. Ali Attai, to mention him again from Zaytuna College, did a series of amazing
Mm,
podcasts on blogging theology at the
mm,
end of last year after the
mhm,
genocide began, and he delved deeply into the history of Zionism,
mm,
into other texts to try and understand, to make sense of some of the statements that were coming out of Netanyahu's mouth to do with the Amalek in the Bible,
mm,
for example. So,
mhm,
and also the history of Zionism as a secular political movement, going back to Herzl, of course, in the 19th century, this Swiss
mm.
solicitor in the 19th century who began the movement. So we've got to understand the history, we've got to understand the theology, the
Because
Bible.
there is theological part also in
Absolutely. And the
yeah.
theology is, think, well, why do I have to read the Bible? What's the Bible got to do with the world today? Well, a lot of people are reading the Bible, and they're making history today on the basis of their distorted misinterpretation of biblical texts,
Mm,
particularly, as I say, Zionists who think this gives them license
mm,
somehow to commit genocide. And this is not exaggerated language. The dog whistles from some quarters allude to certain texts, like 1 Samuel
mm,
15 in the Bible, for example, about the Amalek, which is a call to genocide. So we need to understand what they're actually saying, first of all, because the Western media didn't pick up on this in the main, because most journalists haven't read the Bible. But for those of us who have, recognize what was being said. So we need to wise up about the Bible and read it, wise up about theology, because the theological motivations behind a lot of settler colonialism
mm,
is real and it's increasing. The religious dynamic it didn't used to be like that. The kibbutz movement, originally was kind of Marxist or socialist. It was secular.
mm,
But a lot of the new people doing this are motivated by very extreme interpretations of the Bible. So we need to be aware of how texts are being used against Muslims to dispossess them. But also my own story in the last year, I've had a further development in my thinking, an awareness of how the West itself, in response to or encouragement or endorsing or facilitating these events, is really supremacist in its outlook. It's racist, and I don't mean the individual people in the West are necessarily racist in that crude sense. I mean, the whole of the Western civilization has an exceptionalist mentality. It believes that it's superior.
mm,
It believes it knows best for the world. It is racist. We see this in its easy acceptance of Ukrainian refugees, some Russian invasion, and the way they see non-white Palestinians, be they Muslims or Christians, and the way that they are nameless. They don't have the same value as white Westerners, and this doesn't even have to be argued for. You can see it; it's obvious to everyone. And this for me was a shocking paradigm shift because
mm,
because the West speaks from one corner of its mouth. We believe in individual freedom, tolerance, democracy, the rule of international law. What we believe in the sovereignty of peoples. But on the other hand, they and I've heard leading politicians of the left in Britain say, we believe Israel has an absolute right to defend itself,
mm,
and then they say they have a right to cut off food and water and aid and supplies to the Palestinians. The foreign secretary, the new Labour foreign secretary, when she was in opposition, said this at the end of last year. This is shocking beyond words, that these people support democracy and liberalism, and yet they support genocide. And how can this be? This is part of the weird hypocrisy, the weird double standards. The rest of the world sees very clearly, but in the West we don't think like that. So this is very troubling. It's a moment of revelation about the West as much as it is about the brutality of what's happening in Palestine, unfortunately.
How do you manage between pessimism and optimism within this context? Because I, and this is a very personal question, to be honest. I'm asking from myself. Me among my friends and everything, we have been talking with every news, the new thing that you get to know about what's happening. It tops the previous one, and you think that this is it. This is the worst that could happen, and then something else tops it. And sometimes it feels sometimes we ask the question whether it's always going to be like that. And I'm not talking specifically about the locality
What's
of
clear
what's
about our
happening.
position now, unique, has never happened in history before, is that we see it ourselves. Doesn't matter where we are on the planet. I've never been to Palestine, but I can see what's going on in Palestine, and that was never the case before the rise of social media. So we're now all personally aware through TikTok, Twitter, X, whatever, of what's going on. And even when I'm scrolling through my Twitter and I don't want to see it, I see dead bodies of children. I mean, it's having breakfast, scrolling through my Twitter, and it's just that's not acceptable. We shouldn't have to be impacted in this involuntary way, like all the time. But so, I mean, I'm conflicted. On the one hand, we know, do we not, that when a child dies, in whatever circumstances, particularly in these horrible ways, they are instantly in paradise. That they are instantly in an infinitely better place with their Lord. And so I'd rather be with them than here. That they are fortunate. They've not had to grow up and face these terrible trials as adults. They have been transported directly from here to paradise. So that's kind of comforting, I think. But on the other hand, what's happened to them is a terrible, terrible crime, and it's inexcusable. And words, we see the dead bodies. So I'm conflicted between the sense of outrage and powerlessness and the appallingness of what we see. But on the other hand, when martyrs fight and they die, they go straight to paradise. This is the promise of Islam. They don't go through this period of, they don't go to hell for a while. They're guaranteed paradise with their Lord. And so we have that hope. We have that certainty of the hereafter, which is wonderful. But on the other hand, we have this terror, this awful thing that's happening. And at the same time also, we all know this, that behind the scenes, it's not just us on this planet. Behind the scenes, there are angels, there are jinn, there are forces acting on behalf of God. Things are happening, and I don't know what it is, but we know this on faith because our scripture tells us this, that everyone dies at their appointed time, or they don't die now, they die at a future time. So God is in control, and that one day there will be justice. No one will escape justice, even one iota, or not an iota of injustice will be done to anyone, as the Quran says. So I'm torn between optimism and hope for the sufferers. Those who have been mercilessly mowed down are in an amazing place with their God, and that's fantastic. Inshallah, I will be there one day too. But on the other hand, to see the terrible, terrible genocide, which is a reality, and it's getting worse as well. And the suffering before it. I mean, it's not just death; it's the suffering that leads up to it. And this is why Islam is, of all religions, the most realistic, because it says in the Quran, that we will be tested, and we were tested with suffering, with deprivation, with loss of life, loss of goods. It's actually very explicit. Actually, we can't say we can't say that we were not warned. Now, I'm not saying that makes it better, but it's there in we're told it will happen, and those for whom it happens, I would hope, inshallah, will have the highest station in the hereafter. by way of compensation, by way of recompense, by way of reward for what they have suffered on earth. And all suffering on earth is temporary. There's one thing we can be sure of, that no matter how bad the suffering is, it will come to an end. It will not last. It will, and it, it will pass. I don't know if that's a comfort or not. It's not like it's like endless forever. It will come to an end. Indeed, the genocide will come to an end. The fighting will come to an end sooner or later. It will come to an end. And then the whole world there will be countless books and PhDs and videos assessing what on earth has happened, and people will point fingers, and I'm pretty sure they'll all be pointing in one direction. It won't be at the Gazans, it will be the others, and the West. I don't know. So that's kind of my thoughts. It's complicated. I don't have an easy answer, but
No,
Islam,
I wouldn't expect an easy answer.
unlike Christianity, Islam does have answers, by the way. Christianity, I remember the Archbishop of Canterbury here in England being asked about children who die of cancer or something. And he said, literally, he had no answer. He said, I don't know the answer to that. At least Muslims can say these children are going to be with their Lord in paradise with total certainty. He couldn't even say that. And he's the head of the church. So, Islam has answers. They're not easy answers, but they're real answers, and they are exactly what is happening in the world.
I want to end on a lighter note. You have been known to be an unapologetic bibliophile, and
incurable is the word, actually.
Yes. I think I read it on the Berkeley Institute. They wrote incurable bibliophile, yes. And I wanted to ask you, what have you been reading recently? And also, if you can list few names over the top of your head that you can suggest to our audience to put on their reading lists.
Oh gosh, yeah. So I'm rereading for the second time one of the most important books ever written in the West, and that is Plato's Republic. This is a book. It's usually thought to be about the ideal society with the philosopher kings and so on. It's actually also an extended allegory. It's about how the individual can be moral, be an integrated person in terms of their intellect and their emotions and their body and so on. It's an absolutely extraordinary book. It's Socrates, who's the main character, talking to various people about all sorts of things. What is justice, how about rulership and education and training, and absolutely fascinating. So, and this is a really important work in the West if you want to understand subsequent history, political history, and ideology and philosophy. Very important. So halfway through that, my second reading, another book is called The Unintended Reformation, and it's how the West became secularized, basically, unintentionally, through what happened at the European Reformation, begun in 1517 by Martin Luther in Germany, and followed on from that. And there were huge wars, Christians killing each other in the millions, literally, in the subsequent centuries. And it's a brilliant book. I know some Muslim scholars who've read it before me and praised it highly. If you really understand why the West is now so secular, it's to do with its past and the way its bad experience with Christianity. But secularism is now proclaimed as the universal solution for all humanity, but it's not the solution for Muslims, obviously, because it's not our problem. It's the solution to a problem that arose in Europe. It's a problem that Muslims didn't have. Indeed, secularism is a problem for Muslims. So that book by a professor of history at Notre Dame University is a really, really great read. And I'm about halfway through that as well. And I kind of have my hand in several other books as well to do with history and philosophy. But those are the two main ones I'm eating, so to speak, my main cuisine at the moment.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us, and thank you so much for this conversation. I will consider it an initial conversation until we have another one in person.
Oh, yes. Very nice. That'd be much better. I much prefer in-person interviews than
Yes. I will make sure to extend another one to have it in person with you, inshallah.
Yeah.
Many thanks, and I hope you good health, and
Thank you.
until we
No,
meet
it's
in
been
person,
great fun.
inshallah.
Thank you for
Thank you
listening
so
to
much.
my ramblings, and it's been
It was
a pleasure to be on your channels. It's been a
absolutely
pleasure.
lovely. It was absolutely lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.